Hello everyone and welcome back. Today, we're taking a fascinating macro-level journey into the very structural bones of a subcontinent. In this explainer, we are unpacking India's macro-geography. And as you'll see, the geography of this vast nation acts as two things simultaneously: an impenetrable protective fortress and a life-giving provider. It's a massive landmass, hosting everything from scorching hot deserts to freezing alpine tundras, literally shaping the climate, the economy, and the geopolitics of the entire region. Let's get right into it.
To keep us on track, here's our agenda for today. First, scale and global position. Second, India's 8 neighboring borders. Third, 6 core physiographic regions. Fourth, the Ghats and river basins. And finally, maritime zones and growing forests.
Okay, let's dive into this. 3.29 million square kilometers. That is an absolutely immense scale. This number literally makes India the 7th largest country on Earth, accounting for roughly 2.4% of the world's total land area. To really put that into perspective, you could fit pretty much the entirety of Western Europe right inside its borders. When you're dealing with a landmass this massive, you aren't just dealing with a single climate or terrain. You are dealing with a geographic engine that creates its own continental realities.
To anchor this giant on the globe, let's look at the exact coordinates. It stretches from 8 degrees 4 minutes north at the mainland's tip, all the way up to 37 degrees 6 minutes north, and spreads from 68 degrees 7 minutes east over to 97 degrees 25 minutes east. Basically, it measures over 3,000 kilometers from north to south and nearly 3,000 from east to west. This incredibly wide footprint creates a vast canvas of geographic diversity. In fact, it drives 6 distinct Köppen climate zones. We're talking tropical wet and humid subtropical in the east, hot desert and semi-arid out west, all the way to alpine and tundra conditions high up in the mountains. Plus, this massive spread is what dictates the country's distinct 4-season cycle: winter, pre-monsoon summer, the absolutely vital southwest monsoon, and the post-monsoon retreat.
Section 1. India's 8 neighboring borders, the fortress walls.
So, India shares over 15,200 kilometers of land borders with a highly diverse set of neighbors. We've got China and Pakistan to the north and west, which are heavily guarded across freezing glaciers and scorching deserts by forces like the Indo-Tibetan Border Police and the Border Security Force. But, and here's a really surprising fact, the longest border India shares isn't actually with China or Pakistan. It's with Bangladesh, spanning a massive 4,096 kilometers across dense river deltas. We also see substantial borders with Nepal, Myanmar, and Bhutan, each traversing incredibly challenging terrain from dense forests right up to the highest mountain ranges on the planet.
But you know, those fortress walls aren't just made of rock and earth. They're also made of water. India boasts a coastline of 7,516 kilometers, bringing it into direct contact with crucial island nations. It shares maritime borders with Sri Lanka across the Palk Strait, the Maldives in the Laccadive Sea, and Indonesia down in the Andaman Sea. This expansive coastline doesn't just define where the land ends, it dramatically expands India's strategic presence straight into the heart of the Indian Ocean.
Section 2. 6 core physiographic regions, the structural bones. We can categorize the entire subcontinent into these 6 distinct zones. First up, the northern mountains, dominated by the Himalayas. Second, the massive peninsular plateau down south. Third, the incredibly fertile Indo-Gangetic Plain. Fourth, the arid Thar Desert out to the west. Fifth, the coastal plains wrapping around the peninsula. And finally, the island territories. These 6 zones give you the complete structural menu of the subcontinent all at once.
Let's focus on the most famous of these structures, the Himalayas. Formed by a monumental tectonic collision over 50 million years ago, this range is the ultimate embodiment of our fortress and provider narrative. As a fortress, it acts as a colossal physical barrier blocking freezing polar winds from sweeping into South Asia, which, by the way, is exactly what allows the life-giving southwest monsoon to develop and thrive. As a provider, its glaciers feed the perennial river systems that sustain hundreds of millions of lives on the plains below.
Section 3. The Ghats and river basins, contrasts and veins.
Now, what's really interesting about this contrast is how these two mountain ranges flank the peninsular plateau. The Western Ghats are a steep, continuous escarpment that intercepts rain-laden monsoon winds, making them a globally recognized biodiversity hotspot. Believe it or not, they're actually older than the Himalayas. But moving eastward, the Eastern Ghats present a totally different story. They are even older than the Western Ghats, but they are broken, non-continuous, and heavily eroded. Why? Because the immense rivers of the plateau have spent literally millions of years carving right through them to reach the Bay of Bengal.
And this brilliantly illustrates the provider aspect of India's geography. The Ganga River Basin is a perfect example of those Himalayan perennial river systems. Stretching 2,525 kilometers, the Ganges doesn't just bring year-round water. It brings down an enormous amount of eroded sediment from the Himalayas. Over time, these flood deposits laid the foundation for the Indo-Gangetic Plains. This dynamic sediment transfer has created highly productive multi-aquifer systems, essentially forming an underground storehouse of water, an incredibly fertile soil that sustains agriculture for a massive population.
Further south, the river dynamics shift entirely to seasonal systems. Because the Deccan Plateau has a natural west-to-east tilt, major seasonal peninsular rivers like the Godavari, Krishna, and Kaveri originate near the Western Ghats, flow completely across the peninsula, and carve their way straight through those broken Eastern Ghats we just talked about, before finally emptying into the Bay of Bengal. It is just a perfect example of topography dictating hydrology.
Section 4. Maritime zones and growing forests. Outward expansion.
I want you to think about this for a second. Where does India's territory actually end? We've talked about the land borders and the coastline, but in terms of sovereignty and economic rights, the physical beach is definitely not the end of the line. There are invisible borders extending far out into the ocean.
So the crucial point is this staggering number, 2.02 million square kilometers. That is the size of India's exclusive economic zone, or EEZ. Under international law, this zone extends up to 200 nautical miles from the coast, giving India exclusive rights to explore and manage marine resources, fisheries, oil, and gas. It's the 18th largest EEZ on the globe, meaning India's true territorial footprint is vastly larger than its landmass alone. For anyone tracking global supply chains, energy markets, or ocean conservation, this zone is an absolutely critical piece of global real estate.
To manage all this oceanic wealth, India has initiated several integrated coastal security and development projects. We see the Sagarmala project modernizing port infrastructure to really enhance connectivity. There are extensive coastal surveillance radar networks installed across key islands to monitor maritime traffic and enforce security. And looking into the future, there's the Deep Ocean Mission, designed to explore deep-sea resources and marine biotechnology. Let's move on and see how this builds back onto the land. The 2025 Global Forest Resources Assessment brings some incredible news. India has officially advanced to the 9th position globally in total forest area, managing over 72 million hectares of forest. This means roughly 2% of the world's total forests are rooted right within India's borders.
The ecological momentum here is undeniably positive. Not only is India 9th in total area, but it continues to hold the 3rd position worldwide for net annual forest area gain. Furthermore, it is ranked 5th among the top global carbon sinks. This totally proves that the subcontinent's geography isn't just a static collection of rocks and borders, it is a growing, actively managed living ecosystem.
To really put that ecological impact into perspective, consider this number, 150 million tons. That represents the exact amount of carbon dioxide removed from the atmosphere annually by Indian forests between 2021 and 2025. By maintaining and expanding its forests, India's geographic provider role extends far beyond its own borders, providing an essential service to the global climate system.
We've covered the immense scale, the fortress walls of the borders, the structural bones of the mountains and plateaus, the life-giving rivers, and the expansive maritime and forest zones. It leaves us with this really provocative thought. The Indian plate is still moving. The Himalayas are still rising. The rivers are still carving. How will the dynamic tectonic and ecological forces of this subcontinent shape its next million years? It's a geography that is never truly finished. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.